Welcome, weary traveler of the digital age. You have found a quiet place, a sanctuary from the relentless pace of the world outside. Here, we trade the glare of the present for the soft, flickering torchlight of the past. We delve into stories etched in stone and whispered on the sands of time. Tonight our journey takes us to the heart of ancient Egypt, to a place of profound reverence and breathtaking secrecy, a landscape carved by both nature and an unshakable faith in eternity. We are going to the Valley of the Kings. This is not just a story of gold and mummies, of curses and discoveries. It is a journey into the ancient Egyptian soul, an exploration of their intricate and deeply moving understanding of life, death, and the perilous voyage into the afterlife. For them, death was not a final curtain, but merely a doorway to another, more enduring existence. The Valley of the Kings was the threshold, the place where that journey began, equipped with all the knowledge, magic, and provisions a soul would need to navigate the underworld and be reborn in the field of reeds. Before we embark, I invite you to settle in. Find a comfortable position. Let the weight of your day begin to lift. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the grand tapestry of Egypt's long history, the pyramids stand as the most iconic monuments to a pharaoh's journey into the afterlife. For 1,000 years, from the Old Kingdom through the Middle Kingdom, these colossal structures of stone dominated the horizon, serving as both tomb and celestial ladder, designed to project the king's spirit towards the circumpolar stars. They were magnificent, audacious statements of power, divinity, and the belief in an eternal reign. But they were also conspicuous. Their very grandeur was a beacon, a shining invitation to those who would seek to plunder their sacred contents. Despite intricate internal passageways, false doors, and massive granite portcullises, nearly every pyramid was broken into and robbed in antiquity, its treasures stolen, and the royal mummy desecrated, jeopardizing the pharaoh's eternity. By the time the new kingdom dawned around 1550 BCE, it was clear to the rulers of this new, reunified Egypt that a change was needed. The age of monumental public burial was over. The age of secrecy had begun. The choice of a new royal burial ground was a matter of supreme theological and practical importance. The site had to be remote, easily guarded, and symbolically significant. The pharaohs of the burgeoning 18th dynasty found such a place on the west bank of the Nile, opposite the sprawling religious capital of Thebes, modern-day Luxor. Here, a desolate, sun-scorched valley cut deep into the limestone cliffs. It was a stark and intimidating landscape, a natural chasm of rock and sand that would come to be known as the Valley of the Kings. The very geography of the site was steeped in sacred meaning. The west, where the sun god Re began his nightly journey into the underworld, had always been the domain of the dead. Furthermore, the valley was overlooked by a formidable, naturally occurring peak known as El-Kern, which translates simply to the horn. Its shape, to the ancient Egyptians, was no accident. It was a perfect natural pyramid, a divine echo of the ancestral tombs, created by the gods themselves. To be buried in its shadow was to be buried under the protection of a primeval celestial monument, The decision to move the royal necropolis here is credited to Pharaoh Thutmose I, the third king of the 18th dynasty. He sought an eternal horizon, a tomb that would remain inviolate for all time. He commissioned his most trusted architect and vizier Inanni to find a suitable location and secretly excavate his final resting place. Inanni's own tomb inscriptions provide a rare personal account of this momentous task. He wrote, "I supervised the excavation of the cliff tomb of His Majesty, alone, no one seeing, no one hearing." This simple statement underscores the radical shift in policy. Secrecy was now the ultimate form of security. Instead of building a massive tomb on the surface, they would hew a complex labyrinth deep into the living rock, hiding its entrance from the world. The tomb itself was no longer the primary monument. The entire valley, watched over by the sacred peak of El-Kern and patrolled by a dedicated police force, the Medjay, became the monument. This shift was not merely a practical one driven by the fear of tomb robbers. It also reflected an evolution in religious beliefs. During the New Kingdom, the solar theology centered on the god Amun-Ra reached its zenith. The pharaoh was considered the son of Amun-Ra, and his journey after death mirrored the sun god's own nightly passage through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. Each night, Ra would enter the underworld in the west, travel through 12 hours of darkness, battling monsters and forces of chaos like the serpent Apep, before being triumphantly reborn at dawn in the east. The new tomb design was a physical manifestation of this journey. The long descending corridors, the deep chambers, and the intricate decorations painted on the walls were not just rooms. They were a map, a guide, a magical engine designed to propel the deceased pharaoh through the perils of the Duat and ensure his own glorious rebirth alongside Re. The tomb became a ritual space, a self-contained universe where the drama of royal resurrection would play out for eternity. The valley itself is actually two valleys. The main East Valley, where the majority of the tombs are located, and the more remote West Valley, which contains only a few burials, including the tomb of the pharaoh Amenhotep III. The main valley is a tight, winding wadi, its floor littered with the chippings of limestone excavated over centuries, a testament to the immense labor involved in its creation. The entrances to the tombs were designed to be small and easily concealed. Once the burial was complete, the entrance shaft would be filled with rubble, and the surrounding hillside might even be landscaped to restore its natural appearance, erasing any trace of the tomb's existence. This was the great hope, that the king could rest undisturbed in his house of eternity, surrounded by all the texts, tools, and treasures he would need to successfully navigate the afterlife. For nearly 500 years, from Thutmose I to Ramesses XI, this silent, sun-beaten valley became the final resting place for the most powerful men in the ancient world, the great pharaohs of the New Kingdom. It was their solution to the problem of eternity, a grand and secret project that would, against all odds, preserve some of the greatest treasures and most profound beliefs of their civilization for millennia to come. The story of the Valley of the Kings is the story of this sacred trust between the pharaoh and his people, a desperate and beautiful attempt to conquer death itself. The selection of this specific wadi was also influenced by its geology. The cliffs were composed of a suitable quality of limestone, stable enough to allow for the excavation of long corridors and grand chambers without collapsing, yet soft enough to be worked with the simple tools available to the ancient craftsmen, chisels of bronze and dolerite pounders. However, the quality of the rock was not uniform. Throughout the valley's history, tomb builders often had to contend with layers of poor quality shale or flint, which could force them to alter the axis of a tomb, create sudden descents, or even abandon a section altogether. The tomb of Ramesses II, one of the largest in the valley, shows clear evidence of this, with its axis shifting multiple times to avoid unstable rock layers. These geological challenges are a reminder that the creation of these tombs was a constant negotiation between divine plan and earthly reality. The architects and workers had to be incredibly adaptable, their skill evident in their ability to overcome these natural obstacles to create such enduring masterpieces. The very act of carving a tomb was a monumental feat of engineering and project management, requiring a level of organization that speaks volumes about the sophistication of the New Kingdom bureaucracy. Furthermore, the valley's isolation was a key defensive asset. It was located miles from the nearest settlements, accessible only through a narrow, winding path that could be easily guarded. This remote location created a natural barrier, deterring casual thieves and making any organized attempt at robbery a significant undertaking. The community of workers who built and decorated the tombs, the artisans of Deir el-Medina, were themselves isolated, living in a purpose-built village on the other side of the Theban hills. This segregation was a deliberate security measure designed to contain the secret knowledge of the tombs' locations and their valuable contents. The lives of these workers, their triumphs and their struggles, are a story in themselves, a crucial chapter in the history of the valley. Their village, now a treasure trove for archaeologists, provides an unparalleled glimpse into the daily lives of the common people, who were entrusted with the Pharaohs' eternal secrets. The theological landscape of Thebes also played a crucial role. On the east bank of the Nile stood the great temples of Karnak and Luxor, the earthly homes of the gods, bustling centers of religious and economic activity. The west bank was, in contrast, the land of the dead. It was a vast necropolis that included not only the Valley of the Kings, but also the Valley of the Queens, the tombs of the nobles, and the massive mortuary temples where the cult of the deceased pharaoh was celebrated long after his death. This entire area was a sacred landscape, meticulously planned and organized according to religious principles. The mortuary temple, known as the Mansion of Millions of Years, was the public face of the king's afterlife cult, the place where daily offerings were made to sustain his spirit. The tomb in the valley, however, was his private, hidden abode. This separation of the public cult temple from the secret burial place was another key innovation of the New Kingdom, a further layer of security designed to draw attention away from the actual tomb. The grand processions, like the beautiful feast of the valley, would travel from Karnak to the mortuary temples on the west bank, honoring the dead kings, but the true location of their bodies remained a closely guarded secret, hidden deep within the silent, sacred cliffs of the Valley of the Kings. This intricate interplay between geography, geology, theology, and security is what makes the valley so unique. It was not merely a graveyard. It was a carefully chosen, multi-layered, system designed to guarantee immortality. The first pharaoh to be interred in this new necropolis, Thutmose I, set a precedent that would be followed for generations. His tomb, now known as Kivi 3-8, was modest by later standards, a simple affair consisting of a steep descending staircase, a small antechamber, and a single burial chamber with a rounded, cartouche-like shape. The decorations were sparse, featuring scenes from the Am-Duju, or that which is in the Underworld, rendered in a simple, linear style. Yet it was revolutionary. It established the fundamental blueprint for a new kingdom royal tomb, a hidden, subterranean structure designed as a journey through the underworld. His daughter, Hatshepsut, who'd later rule as pharaoh in her own right, initially prepared a tomb for herself in the valley as queen, but upon ascending the throne, she commissioned a new one befitting her kingly status, KV-20. This tomb was one of the most unusual in the valley, descending over 200 meters into the rock in a series of curving corridors, perhaps intended to circumnavigate the tomb of her father so she could be buried alongside him. The reign of Amenhotep III marked a significant expansion and a period of unparalleled artistic achievement. He chose a separate location, the West Valley, for his tomb, W22. This massive tomb was lavishly decorated and filled with an incredible array of funerary goods, reflecting the immense wealth and stability of Egypt at the height of its imperial power. The discovery of caches of funerary objects from his tomb, including hundreds of beautifully crafted Shabdi figures, gives us a sense of the original splendor of these burials. However, it was during the Ramesside period that the valley saw its most intensive use. The pharaohs of the 19th and 20th dynasties, such as Seti I, Ramesses II, and Ramesses III, constructed some of the largest, longest, and most elaborately decorated tombs in the necropolis. The tomb of Seti I, in particular, is considered the pinnacle of funerary art, with every inch of its 137-meter length covered in exquisitely painted reliefs of the highest quality. These tombs represent the full flowering of the theological and artistic concepts that had been developing for centuries. They are a testament to the enduring power of the pharaoh and the unwavering belief in the promise of eternal life that lay at the heart of Egyptian civilization. The valley became a library of stone, each tomb a sacred book containing the accumulated knowledge and magic of a nation obsessed with immortality. The decision made by Thutmose I and his vizier Ineni to trade the monumental for the secret had proven to be a profoundly successful one, creating a legacy that would echo through eternity. High in the Theban hills, nestled in a small, isolated, bowl-shaped valley of its own, lies a site that is, in many ways, as remarkable as the Valley of the Kings itself. It is a place known today as Deir el-Medina, but in ancient times it was called Set Mat, the place of truth. This was no city of the dead. It was a vibrant, living community, the purpose-built village for the royal tomb builders. These were the men, the stone cutters, plasterers, scribes, and artists who possessed the most sensitive secrets in all of Egypt: the location, layout, and contents of the pharaoh's eternal homes. For nearly 500 years, this small, segregated community of artisans and their families lived and died here, dedicating their lives to the singular, sacred task of excavating and decorating the tombs of the Valley of the Kings. The story of Deir, el-Medina, is the human story behind the divine project, a story preserved in such astonishing detail that it provides us with one of the clearest windows into the daily lives of common people in the ancient world. The village was founded at the beginning of the 18th dynasty, likely during the reign of Amenhotep I, though it was Thutmose I who first employed its inhabitants for his tomb. The location was deliberately chosen for isolation. It was hidden from the Nile Valley, and its inhabitants were discouraged from mingling with the general population of Thebes. A high wall enclosed the community, with a single gateway controlled by guards. A steep path led over the crest of the hill to the Valley of the Kings, a commute the workers would make each day. Another path led down towards the mortuary temples, on the plain from where they received their supplies. This was a state-controlled project of the highest order. The men who lived here were not slaves, but highly skilled, well-compensated, and respected craftsmen employed directly by the pharaonic administration under the supervision of the vizier. They were known as servants in the place of truth, a title that reflected the profound religious significance of their work. They were creating the magical machinery for the king's resurrection, and their role was seen as both a practical craft and a sacred duty. The village itself was a tight grid of stone-founded mud brick houses. A typical house was long and narrow, consisting of 4 to 5 rooms in a line, an entrance hall, a main living room with a raised dais for sitting and sleeping, a bedroom, a kitchen with a clay oven, and a cellar for storage, and stairs leading up to a flat roof, which provided an additional living and sleeping space in the hot Egyptian climate. These homes were brightly painted, their walls sometimes adorned with images of household gods, like Bes, the dwarf deity who protected against evil, and Tauret, the hippopotamus goddess of childbirth. The state provided the houses, but the families that lived in them left their own mark, modifying and expanding them over generations. Archaeological excavation has revealed not just the layout of the village, but the objects of daily life: pottery, furniture, tools, children's toys, and even the names of the occupants painted on their doorframes. This intimate detail allows us to reconstruct the lives of these families with incredible precision. We know their names, their professions, their disputes, and their loves, all thanks to an accident of preservation and their own remarkable habit of writing everything down. One of the most extraordinary aspects of the Deir el-Medina community was its exceptionally high rate of literacy. While literacy in ancient Egypt was generally restricted to a small elite of scribes and officials, a large proportion of the men in this village could read and write. This was a practical necessity for their work, which involved consulting architectural plans and interpreting complex religious texts. But their literacy extended far beyond their professional duties. They left behind a massive trove of informal documents, written not on expensive papyrus, but on cheap, readily available flakes of limestone or pottery sherds, known as ostraka. Thousands of these ostraka have been recovered from the village and its rubbish pits, and they are an unparalleled source of information. They record work rosters detailing who was present, who was absent, and why. The reasons for absence are wonderfully human: brewing beer, strengthening his doorway, suffering from his eye, or the most common excuse: his wife was bleeding, indicating either that his wife was menstruating or had just given birth. Ostraka also preserved the minutiae of their economic lives. The workers were not paid in money, which did not yet exist in the modern sense, but in rations of grain, emmer wheat for bread and barley for beer, supplemented with provisions of fish, vegetables, oil, and wine. The state was their employer and supplier, and the scribes of the village meticulously recorded the delivery of these wages. When the state bureaucracy failed, as it sometimes did during periods of political instability, the workers were not afraid to take action. The famous strike papyrus of the reign of Ramesses III, now in the Museum of Turin, records the first known organized labor strike in history. The papyrus documents how, with their rations weeks in arrears, the workers laid down their tools and marched out of the valley, protesting, "We are hungry." 18 days have passed this month. They staged a sit-in at the mortuary temples of Thutmose III and Ramesses II, refusing to move until their overdue wages were delivered. This was a brave and risky act of defiance against the pharaonic state, and it demonstrates a strong sense of collective identity and a clear understanding of their own value. They were the guardians of the king's eternity, and they knew it. Their writings also reveal their personal lives. We have ostraka that are letters between villagers, laundry lists, sales receipts for donkeys and furniture, and even transcripts of legal disputes. The court of the village, composed of its own foremen and scribes, adjudicated cases ranging from theft to adultery. We also have copies of literary texts, as the workers would practice their writing by copying famous poems and stories. Most touchingly, we find expressions of their personal piety. The villagers had their own local cults, distinct from the grand state religion of Thebes. They built a small temple within their village dedicated to the deified pharaoh Amenhotep, and his mother Amos-Nefertari, whom they revered as their patron saints. They also worshipped their own local peak, Meretseger, she who loves silence, the cobra goddess who was believed to inhabit the mountain overlooking their village and the Valley of the Kings. They left behind hundreds of stelae, small stone monuments dedicated to these gods, inscribed with prayers for health, children, and forgiveness for their sins. These texts show a deep and personal relationship with the divine, a far cry from the formal, ritualized worship of the great state temples. The workforce was organized into two gangs, or ijit, known as the left side and the right side, which mirrored the two sides of a ship's crew. Each gang was responsible for excavating one side of a tomb's corridor and was led by a foreman. Scribes were responsible for all administrative tasks, from recording attendance and rations to ensuring the correct sacred texts were being copied onto the tomb walls. Under the foreman were deputies, and below them the skilled craftsmen, the stone cutters who did the heavy work of hewing the tomb from the rock, the plasterers who prepared the walls with a smooth layer of gypsum, the draftsmen who sketched the scenes and hieroglyphs in red ink, and finally, the painters who brought the designs to life with vibrant mineral pigments. The work was arduous and dangerous. The air in the deep tombs would have been thick with dust, and the only light came from the smoky, flickering flames of oil lamps. Yet the quality of their work, especially in tombs like that of Seti I, is a testament to their incredible skill and dedication. The community had its own cemetery, located on the slopes of the hill above the village. Unlike the grand tombs they built for royalty, their own tombs were small, consisting of a simple surface chapel, topped with a miniature pyramid and a subterranean burial chamber. But these tombs were beautifully decorated, the workers, being the finest artists in Egypt, used their skills to create their own vibrant houses of eternity. The walls of their burial chambers are not filled with the arcane funerary texts of the pharaohs, but with lively, colorful scenes from the Book of the Dead, showing the deceased and his wife adoring the gods, tending a celestial farm in the field of reeds, and enjoying the eternal afterlife they had worked so hard to secure for their kings. These tombs are a poignant expression of their own hopes for immortality, a smaller, more personal echo of the royal project they served. The fate of Deir el-Medina was inextricably linked to the fate of the Valley of the Kings. As the new kingdom began to wane in the 20th dynasty, the security of the Theban necropolis started to crumble. The state, weakened by internal power struggles and economic decline, could no longer guarantee the regular delivery of rations, leading to more strikes and social unrest. More seriously, it could no longer effectively police the Valley of the Kings. The tomb robbery papyri from this period paint a grim picture of organized gangs, sometimes with the collusion of local officials systematically plundering the royal tombs. The very men entrusted with guarding the secrets of the valley were, in some cases, the ones who violated them. By the end of the 20th dynasty, around 1070 BCE, the Valley of the Kings was abandoned as an active royal necropolis. The state's focus shifted north, and the grand project of the southern royal burial ground was over. With no more tombs to build, the reason for Deir el-Medina's existence vanished. The village was gradually abandoned, its inhabitants absorbed back into the general population. The desert sand slowly filled its empty houses, and the place of truth, home to the architects of eternity, fell silent, preserving its secrets until the arrival of modern archaeologists, who would find in its ruins an unparalleled record of life, labor, and faith in the shadow of the pharaohs. To step inside a royal tomb in the Valley of the Kings is to leave the sunlit world of the living and enter a different reality. It is a world of profound silence, darkness, and sacred imagery. The air itself feels ancient. But these tombs were not designed as gloomy resting places for the dead. They were powerful, magical engines, meticulously engineered to facilitate the deceased pharaoh's transformation and triumphant journey through the perilous underworld, known as the Duat. The primary mechanism of this engine was the art that covered its walls. From the moment one passes the threshold, every surface corridors, antechambers, burial halls is covered in a breathtaking panorama of gods, demons, and cryptic hieroglyphic texts. This was not mere decoration. It was a divine instruction manual, a sacred map, and a supernatural weapon. These images and words were intended to be animated by ritual, to come alive in the darkness, and provide the king with the knowledge and power he would need to conquer death and achieve eternal rebirth with the sun god. The artistic program of the tombs evolved over the course of the new kingdom, but the central purpose remained the same. The walls served as a permanent, unalterable record of a collection of sacred funerary compositions, often referred to today as the books of the Underworld. These were not books in the modern sense, with covers and pages, but complex theological and cosmological treatises that describe the geography of the Duat and the events that took place there during the 12 hours of the night. The journey of the deceased king was modeled directly on the journey of A. Each night the sun god was thought to die in the west, enter the underworld, and travel through its 12 divisions, one for each hour of the night, before being reborn, young and renewed, in the eastern sky at dawn. By providing the pharaoh with these texts, the Egyptians believed he could unite with the sun god and share in his daily cycle of renewal and resurrection. The tomb itself was a model of the Duat, and as the king's sarcophagus was carried deeper into the earth, it was ritually passing through the hours of the night, guided by the scenes on the walls. One of the earliest and most important of these texts is the Amduat, which translates as that which is in the underworld, first appearing in the Valley of the Kings in the tomb of Thutmose I. The Amduat provides a detailed hour-by-hour guide to the Duat. It is a systematic, almost scientific description of the underworld's inhabitants and landscape. Each hour is depicted as a distinct region with its own unique challenges and divine beings. The text and images show the solar bark, the boat of Ra, carrying the sun god in his ram-headed nocturnal form, accompanied by a retinue of other deities. In each hour they encountered different groups of spirits, both blessed and damned. The blessed souls are shown revitalized by Ra's passing, while the enemies of the sun god are shown being brutally punished by demonic executioners armed with knives and cauldrons. The Amduat is essentially a book of secret knowledge. By knowing the names of the gods and demons of the underworld, the pharaoh could command them. By understanding the layout of the Duat, he could navigate it successfully. The ultimate goal, achieved in the 12th hour, was the reunion of Re's soul with his body, a moment of profound regeneration that culminated in his rebirth as the morning sun, in the form of a scarab beetle, Khepri. As the new kingdom progressed, new funerary texts were developed, often displayed alongside the Amduat, to provide even more magical protection and knowledge. One of these was the Book of Gates, which became prominent in the tombs of the late 18th and 19th dynasties, such as that of Horemheb and Seti. As its name suggests, the Book of Gates divides the underworld not by hours, but by a series of 12 massive gates, each guarded by a fearsome serpent deity. The text provides the specific magic spells the deceased must utter to persuade the guardian to open the gate. The focus of the Book of Gates is on judgment. At the end of the journey, the deceased faces a tribunal, similar to the final judgment scene in the more famous Book of the Dead. The righteous, or true of voice, are granted passage into the eternal light of the sun, while the wicked are annihilated in fiery pits, a concept vividly illustrated in the tomb paintings. This text emphasizes the moral dimension of the afterlife, where salvation depends not just on secret knowledge, but on having lived a just life. A third major composition found in the royal tombs is the Book of Caverns. This text, which appears in the tombs of the Ramesside pharaohs, takes a different approach. It is less concerned with the linear journey through the hours of night and more focused on the theological structure of the underworld. It describes the Duat as a series of caves or caverns inhabited by various divine beings, and it highlights the rewards of the blessed and the punishments of the damned. The Book of Caverns is particularly graphic in its depiction of the fate of Ra's enemies, who are shown being decapitated, dismembered, and cooked in cauldrons. These terrifying images were not intended to frighten the pharaoh, but to reassure him of his power over the forces of chaos. The text also contains a profound theological message about the ultimate unity of the sun god Ra and the god of the dead, Osiris. In the depths of the underworld, these two great deities merge into a single, all-powerful being symbolizing the fusion of life and death, light and darkness, in the cycle of eternal regeneration. The pharaoh, by identifying with both gods, becomes the ultimate master of the cosmos. Beyond these grand cosmological books, the tombs were also decorated with other important religious texts. The Litany of Ra is a long hymn of praise to the sun god, enumerating his 75 different names and forms. By reciting these names, the pharaoh was thought to mystically acquire all the attributes and powers of the sun god, essentially becoming one with him. The walls of the tomb's entrance corridors are often covered with the text of this litany, so that the king's spirit would be imbued with solar power from the very beginning of its journey. Another text, the Book of the Celestial Cow, recounts the myth of how humanity once rebelled against the aging sun, god Ra, and how Ra, with the help of the fierce goddess Hathor, punished them before withdrawing from the earth to rule from the heavens, which he did by transforming himself into a cow. This story explains the origin of death and the separation of gods and men, and its inclusion in the tomb provided a mythological framework for the king's own celestial ascent. The artistic style used to render these texts is as significant as the content itself. The New Kingdom artists developed a highly sophisticated visual language. The figures are depicted in the characteristic Egyptian composite style, with the head in profile, the eye and shoulders in frontal view, and the limbs in profile. This was not a lack of skill, but a deliberate choice. They were not trying to create a realistic, fleeting image of a person, but an eternal, archetypal representation of them. The goal was to depict the essence of a being, not its momentary appearance. The use of a canon of proportions ensured that all figures were rendered with a sense of divine order and harmony. The colors, too, were symbolic. Black, derived from charcoal, represented death, the underworld, and fertility. Green, from malachite, symbolized resurrection and new life. Red, from ochre, could signify life and vitality, but also danger and chaos. Blue, from Egyptian blue frit, was the color of the heavens and the divine, while yellow and gold represented the sun and the flesh of the gods. These colors were not just decorative. They were imbued with magical properties that added to the power of the images. The pinnacle of this artistic tradition can be seen in the tomb of Seti I, KV 17, often called the Sistine Chapel of ancient Egypt. Every chamber and corridor, its 137-meter length, is covered with exquisitely carved and painted raised reliefs of the highest quality. The tomb contains the first complete known version of the Book of Gates, as well as scenes from the Amduat, the Litany of Ra, and a stunning astronomical ceiling in the burial chamber, depicting the constellations and decans of the northern and southern skies. The level of detail and the subtlety of the carving and painting are breathtaking. It represents the immense resources the state could lavish on a pharaoh's afterlife and the supreme mastery of the artists of Deir el-Medina. In contrast, the famous tomb of Tutankhamun KV 62 is sparsely decorated. Because of his sudden and early death, his tomb, likely intended for a private nobleman, had to be hastily prepared. Only the burial chamber is painted, and the style is less formal, more fluid than that of other royal tombs. Yet even here, the scenes chosen are full of meaning, depicting his funeral procession, his meeting with the goddess Nut, and his embrace by Osiris, all essential acts for ensuring his successful transition to the afterlife. The contrast between the grandeur of Setiai's tomb and the hurried simplicity of Tutankhamun's highlights the supreme importance of the funerary program. Even when time was short, the essential ritual images had to be there. They were the pharaoh's passport to eternity. The world of the ancient Egyptians was cyclical, governed by the rising and setting of the sun and the annual inundation of the Nile. They saw in these rhythms a divine promise of order and renewal. The most powerful of these cycles was the daily journey of the sun god, Ra. His disappearance at dusk was not seen as an ending, but as the beginning of a perilous but ultimately triumphant journey through the dark and mysterious realm of the Underworld. This nocturnal voyage was a cosmic battle against the forces of chaos, culminating in a glorious rebirth at dawn. For the deceased pharaoh, this journey was not just a myth. It was his destiny. By magically fusing his own essence with that of Ra, the king would reenact this cosmic drama in the hidden theater of his tomb, navigating the 12 hours of the night to emerge, victorious and eternal, into the light of a new day. The texts and images on the tomb walls were his script, his map, and his spellbook for this ultimate adventure. The journey begins at twilight, in the first hour of the night. As the sun sinks below the western horizon, the ram-headed Ra, his nocturnal form, steps onto his sacred vessel, the Manjet bark. He is not alone. He is accompanied by a host of other deities who act as his crew and protectors. The gods Siao, perception, and Hu, utterance, stand at the prow, their presence signifying that the journey is guided by divine knowledge and authoritative command. In the center of the bark, a serpent called Mehen coils himself around a shrine containing the sun god, offering magical protection. The pharaoh, now identified with Ra, enters this first division of the Duat, a realm of transition still lit by the fading glow of the sun. The blessed dead who inhabit this region greet the solar bark with joy, for its light revitalizes their spirits. The pharaoh, as Ra, utters the words of power that grant him passage, and the great journey into the heart of darkness commences. The tomb's long descending entrance corridor represents this initial stage, a physical passage from the world of the living into the realm of the gods. The second and third hours of the night see the bark sail upon the waters of a great subterranean river, the Worms. This is a lush, fertile region, a kind of underworld reflection of the Nile Valley. The inhabitants here are the blessed spirits who are granted offerings of bread and beer by the gods. They are the ones who are at peace, and their existence is a tranquil one. For the pharaoh, this part of the journey is relatively calm, a confirmation of the rewards that await the righteous. He is hailed as a conqueror and a rightful ruler in this shadowy kingdom. The artwork in the tombs depicts these serene fields and the grateful spirits who tend them, a vision of the paradise that can be achieved. But this tranquility is merely a prelude to the dangers that lie ahead. The underworld is not a monolithic entity. It is a landscape of stark and sudden contrasts, of peaceful plains and terrifying deserts. The fourth and fifth hours mark a dramatic shift. The river gives way to a barren, sandy desert, the land of Sokar, the ancient hawk-headed god of the Memphite Necropolis, who is himself a god of the deep and mysterious underworld. The solar bark can no longer sail. It transforms into a serpent-headed boat and glides through the sand. The landscape becomes strange and surreal. This is a realm of winding paths and secret passages, and the Amduat text provides the crucial map. Here the pharaoh encounters bizarre, multi-headed serpents and other demonic beings who challenge his passage. The journey becomes a trial, a test of his knowledge of the secret ways of the Duat. The tomb's architecture sometimes reflects this, with sudden changes in axis or deep descents, symbolizing the entry into these more difficult and mysterious regions. The pharaoh must rely on the spells inscribed on his tomb walls to navigate these challenges and prove his worthiness to proceed. It is a stark reminder that the path to rebirth is not an easy one. The sixth hour of the night represents the nadir of the journey, the deepest and most dangerous point in the Duat. It is here that the most profound mystery of the underworld takes place. The pharaoh, as Ra, reaches the realm of Osiris, the king of the dead. In a great cavern, he beholds the corpse of Osiris, the archetypal mummy. In this moment, the souls of Ra and Osiris merge. The life-giving power of the sun god unites with the regenerative potential of the god of the dead. This is the central event of the entire journey. It is the moment of renewal, the instant when the spark of life is rekindled in the depths of darkness. The pharaoh's own mummified body, lying in its sarcophagus deep within the tomb, is mystically identified with the body of Osiris, while his soul, or Ba, is identified with the soul of Ra, the union of these two divine principles within. The pharaoh ensures his own resurrection. From this point forward, the journey is no longer a descent, but an ascent towards the dawn. The seventh hour is fraught with peril, for it is here that the greatest enemy of the sun god, the serpent of chaos, Apep, lies in wait. Apep, also known as Apophis, is a colossal snake who lurks in the waters of the underworld, seeking to swallow the solar bark and extinguish the light of the sun forever, thus bringing the cosmos to an end. The pharaoh, as Ra, must now face his ultimate foe. The tomb walls depict this epic battle. The goddess Isis uses her magic to bewitch the serpent, while the god Set, standing at the prow of the bark, repels him with a great spear. Other gods and goddesses are shown binding Apep with ropes and cutting him to pieces with knives. This is not a battle that is won once, but a conflict that must be repeated every single night. The inclusion of these scenes in the tomb provided the pharaoh with the magical weapons and divine allies he would need to participate in this eternal struggle against chaos. By defeating Apep, the pharaoh proves his power and ensures the continuation of cosmic order. Having triumphed over chaos, the pharaoh guides the solar bark through the 8th, 9th, and 10th hours of the night. These regions are populated by more groups of spirits, both blessed and damned. The blessed are shown being clothed, fed, and revitalized by the light of the passing sun god. The damned, the enemies of Ra and Osiris, are shown suffering horrific punishments in fiery pits and lakes of fire presided over by terrifying knife-wielding demons. These graphic scenes, particularly prominent in the Book of Gates and the Book of Caverns, served a dual purpose. They were a grim warning of the fate that awaited those who lived a life of injustice, but more importantly, they were a powerful assertion of the Pharaoh's judicial authority in the afterlife. As they knew, he was the supreme judge, with the power to reward the righteous and annihilate the wicked. The tomb became a celestial courtroom where his divine authority was established for all eternity. The 11th hour is a time of preparation for the final triumph. The instruments of rebirth are assembled. The gods who will tow the solar bark into the sky appear. The text speaks of the hour of the starry night, when the transformation is almost complete. The pharaoh can see the eastern horizon approaching. The darkness begins to fade, and the promise of a new day is imminent. The figures on the walls now look forward, their gazes directed towards the east, towards the light. The tension builds. As the moment of apotheosis draws near, the 12th and final hour of the night is the moment of glorious rebirth. The solar bark enters the eastern horizon, which the Egyptians envisioned as the body of the sky goddess, Nut. The pharaoh, now completely fused with the sun god, passes through her body and is reborn from her womb as the morning sun. He emerges, not as the old ram-headed Ra of the night, but as the young, vibrant sun-child, represented by the scarab beetle, Khepri, the symbol of becoming and transformation. The journey is complete. The forces of chaos have been defeated, the mystery of regeneration has been accomplished, and the cosmic order has been reaffirmed. The pharaoh is reborn, not as a mere mortal spirit, but as the master of the universe, ready to sail across the daytime sky in his solar bark, bringing light and life to the world. The tomb, having served its purpose as the crucible of this transformation, now rests in silence, its magic having successfully launched its divine occupant into his eternal cycle of glory. This nightly drama, repeated for all eternity, was the ultimate promise of the Valley of the Kings, a promise of a journey through the darkest night into the splendor of an everlasting dawn. For the ancient Egyptians, the afterlife was a physical reality, a tangible place where the spirit of the deceased would continue to exist, eat, and interact with the gods. But this eternal existence was entirely dependent on one crucial element, the preservation of the physical body. The body was the anchor for the various aspects of the soul, the Ka, or life force, and the Ba, the mobile bird-like spirit that could travel between the tomb and the world of the gods. If the body decayed, the soul would be left homeless, doomed to a second and final death. To prevent this ultimate catastrophe, the Egyptians developed a complex, lengthy, and deeply ritualized process of artificial preservation known as mummification. This was not a macabre obsession with the dead, but a profound act of faith, a practical and sacred preparation to ensure that the body would remain a viable vessel for the soul for all of eternity. The mummy, lying in its nested coffins deep within the tomb, was the core component of the entire resurrection machine. The art of mummification reached its apex during the New Kingdom, the era of the Valley of the Kings. The process was carried out by specialized priests in a dedicated workshop called the Wabbit, or place of purification. The entire procedure took 70 days, a period of time that was symbolically linked to the 70 days during which the star Sirius disappeared from the night sky before its helical rising, which heralded the life-giving Nile flood. The first and most critical step was the removal of the internal organs, which were the first parts of the body to decompose. A long bronze or obsidian hook was inserted through the nostrils and used to liquefy and extract the brain, which the Egyptians ironically considered to be of little importance. A small incision was then made in the left flank, and through this opening, the embalmers would remove the stomach, the intestines, the liver, and the lungs. The heart, however, was almost always left in place. The Egyptians believed the heart was the seat of intelligence, emotion, and memory, and the deceased would need it for the final judgment in the afterlife, where it would be weighed against the feather of Mat, the goddess of truth. Once removed, the 4 internal organs were cleaned, dried, and treated with resin. They were then placed in 4 special containers known as canopic jars, whose lids were fashioned in the shapes of the heads of the 4 sons of Horus, the divine protectors of the viscera. The human-headed Imseti guarded the liver. The baboon-headed Hapi protected the lungs. The jackal-headed Ujutef watched over the stomach, and the falcon-headed Kebis-Anuf was responsible for the intestines. These jars would be placed in a beautifully decorated canopic chest and interred in the tomb alongside the sarcophagus, ensuring that the complete body, both internal and external, would be magically reconstituted in the afterlife. With the organs removed, the body cavity was washed with palm wine, which had antiseptic properties, and packed with linen and aromatic spices to help it maintain its shape. The next stage was the crucial process of dehydration. The entire body was covered in a pile of natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, harvested from the dry lake beds of the Wadi el-Natron. The natron acted as a powerful desiccant, drawing out all the water from the body's tissues and preventing the growth of bacteria. The body was left in the natron for a period of about 40 days, until it was completely dried and preserved. This process was messy and unpleasant, but it was the key to arresting decay and creating an eternal, recognizable form for the Ka and Ba. After the 40 days of desiccation, the natron was removed, and the body was cleaned one final time with oils and unguents. The empty body cavity was then packed with bundles of linen, sawdust, or peppercorns to restore a more lifelike, rounded appearance. The incision on the flank was sewn up and covered with a wax plaque engraved with the protective eye of Horus. The skin was anointed with fragrant oils and resins to make it more supple and to give it a pleasant smell. The final and perhaps most intricate stage of the process was the wrapping. Hundreds of yards of fine linen strips were used to meticulously wrap the body, limb by limb, finger by finger. This was a long and painstaking process, punctuated by religious rituals and the recitation of magical spells by a lector priest. As the wrapping proceeded, dozens of protective amulets were placed between the layers of linen, each with a specific magical purpose. The Ankh, the symbol of life, was placed in the hands. The Djed pillar, representing the backbone of Osiris, offered stability, and the scarab beetle, a potent symbol of rebirth, was often placed over the heart, inscribed with a spell from the Book of the Dead, beseeching the heart not to testify against the deceased during the final judgment. A beautiful gilded mask, like the famous golden mask of Tutankhamun, was placed over the head of the wrapped mummy, providing an idealized, divine image of the deceased, a face for eternity. Once the mummification was complete, the body was ready for the opening of the mouth ceremony. This was one of the most important rituals of the entire funeral. It was performed just before the mummy was placed in the tomb, either on the mummy itself or on a statue of the deceased. A priest, using a set of special ritual instruments, would touch the mouth, eyes, ears, and nose of the mummy, symbolically opening them so that the spirit could once again speak, see, hear, and breathe in the afterlife. This ritual magically reanimated the preserved body, transforming it from an inert corpse into a living vessel for the spirit. The mummy was then placed within a series of nested coffins, often anthropoid, human-shaped, which were themselves covered in protective spells and images of the gods. This entire assemblage was finally placed within a massive stone sarcophagus in the burial chamber of the tomb, the House of Gold, ready to begin its long sleep. But a preserved body was not enough. The pharaoh's spirit would need all the comforts, tools, and symbols of power he enjoyed in life to sustain his royal status in the next world. Thus, the tombs in the Valley of the Kings were filled with an extraordinary array of funerary goods. The sheer quantity and variety of items found in the nearly intact tomb of Tutankhamun give us our best glimpse of what a complete royal burial would have looked like. There were thrones, like his famous golden throne depicting him and his queen, beds shaped like celestial animals, gilded chariots for royal processions in the afterlife, and chests filled with elegant clothing and jewelry. There were alabaster vases containing precious oils and perfumes, the scent of which was thought to be divine. There were weapons, bows, arrows, and daggers to enable the king to hunt and to defend himself against the enemies of the gods. There were even board games, like Senate, for his eternal amusement. Food and drink were also provided in abundance, both in the form of actual desiccated offerings of meat, bread, and fruit, and in magical form through paintings and models. The Egyptians believed that these representations could be magically activated in the afterlife to provide an endless supply of sustenance. Perhaps the most numerous of all funerary objects were the shabdis. These were small mummiform figurines, often made of faience or wood, that were placed in the tomb in large numbers. The Egyptians believed that in the afterlife, all spirits could be called upon to perform manual labor, such as tilling the fields in the paradise of the Field of Reeds. The shabdis were intended to be the king's magical substitutes. A spell inscribed on them commands them to answer, "Here I am," if the deceased is ever called upon to work, thus allowing the pharaoh to enjoy an eternity of royal leisure. Tutankhamun was buried with 413 shabdis, one for every day of the year, along with 36 overseer figures. This vast collection of objects, from the grandest golden chariot to the smallest faience amulet, was not just a display of wealth. Each item had a specific, practical function in the complex and meticulously planned world of the Egyptian afterlife, ensuring that the pharaoh, resting in his golden sleep, had everything he needed for a powerful and prosperous eternity. The history of the New Kingdom and indeed of the Valley of the Kings, is dominated by a sense of profound tradition. For centuries, the pharaohs worshipped a complex pantheon of gods, with the Theban deity Amun-Ra holding the supreme position. They built their tombs according to an evolving but consistent theological blueprint, all in service of the Osiris-Ra cycle of resurrection. But for one brief, revolutionary, and utterly disruptive period, this ancient tradition was shattered. A single pharaoh, driven by a unique religious vision, turned his back on the gods of his ancestors, abandoned the sacred capital of Thebes, and plunged Egypt into its greatest ever theological crisis. This was the pharaoh Amenhotep IV, who would change his name to Akhenaten. The story of his reign, known as the Amarna period, and its immediate aftermath is crucial to understanding the Valley of the Kings, for it directly led to the burial of the most famous pharaoh of all, the boy king Tutankhamun. Amenhotep IV ascended the throne around 1353 BCE. At the beginning of his reign, he followed tradition, commissioning building projects at the great temple of Karnak, the earthly home of Amun-Ra. But it soon became clear that his religious ideas were diverging radically from the orthodoxy of the day. He began to promote a single universal deity, the Aten, which was the physical disk of the sun itself. This was not just a shift in emphasis. It was a move towards a form of monotheism that was completely alien to the polytheistic traditions of Egypt. Akhenaten declared that the Aten was the sole creator and sustainer of all life, not just in Egypt, but across the entire world. All other gods, he argued, were false idols, their myths mere fictions. This was a direct attack on the powerful and wealthy priesthood of Amun-Ra, which had become a major political and economic force in its own right. In the 5th year of his reign, Akhenaten made his revolution absolute. He changed his own name from Amenhotep, which meant Amun is satisfied, to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten. He then made the momentous decision to abandon Thebes, the religious heart of Egypt, for centuries. He moved his court and capital to a virgin site in the middle of the desert, a place we now call Amarna. He named his new city Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten. Here he built a sprawling city from scratch, with vast open-air temples dedicated to his sun god, a stark contrast to the dark, mysterious sanctuaries of the traditional gods. In his new city, Akhenaten, along with his famous queen, Nefertiti, served as the sole intermediaries between the Aten and humanity. There was no need for a complex pantheon or a powerful priesthood. There was only the Aten and the royal family who interpreted its will. This religious revolution had a profound impact on all aspects of Egyptian culture, including art. The formal, idealized style of traditional Egyptian art was replaced by a new, startlingly naturalistic style. The so-called Amarna art depicted the royal family with elongated skulls, slender necks, sagging stomachs, and wide hips. Whether this was an attempt to portray a genuine physical abnormality or a symbolic representation of the androgynous, life-giving nature of the Aten is still debated. But the effect was revolutionary. For the first time, the pharaoh was depicted not as a perfect, athletic god-king, but as a unique, almost strange-looking individual, often shown in intimate, domestic scenes with his wife and daughters. Basking in the life-giving rays of the Aten dot, the impact on funerary beliefs was equally profound. The entire mythological landscape of the afterlife, Osiris, the Duat, the books of the Underworld, was discarded. For Akhenaten, there was no journey through a dark, demon-haunted underworld. The afterlife was simply about continuing to bask in the light of the Aten. The tombs of the nobles at Amarna are not decorated with scenes of the journey to the field of reeds, but with hymns to the Aeon and scenes of the royal family worshipping the sun disk. Akhenaten even began construction of a royal tomb for himself in a valley to the east of his new city, its design and decoration reflecting his new theology. By doing this, he had rejected not only the gods of Thebes, but also the sacred necropolis of his fathers, the Valley of the Kings. For the duration of his 17-year reign, the valley lay silent and abandoned, its traditions broken, its purpose denied. Akhenaten's revolution, however, did not long survive him. His ideas were too radical, too alien for the Egyptian people, and his neglect of the traditional gods and the empire's political affairs led to instability. After his death, he was succeeded by a shadowy figure named Smike-Ker, and then by a young boy of about 9 years old, who was originally named Tutankhamun, living image of the Aten. This boy was likely Akhenaten's son. Faced with a country in turmoil and guided by powerful court advisors like Ai and Horemheb, who were eager to restore the old order, the young king made a decision that would define his reign. He abandoned the city of Akhenaten and the worship of the Aten. He moved the court back to the traditional capitals of Memphis and Thebes, and he changed his name to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun, signaling a complete restoration of the old gods. The restoration stela, erected by Tutankhamun, describes the state of the country he inherited. It speaks of the temples of the gods having fallen into ruin, their shrines overgrown with weeds. It proclaims his great work of restoring the temples, reinstituting the priesthoods, and bringing the country back from the brink of chaos. This was his primary legacy. He was a king who healed the land after the trauma of the Amarna heresy. However, his reign was short. He died suddenly around the age of 19, under circumstances that are still debated. His death created a crisis. He had no heir, and his own tomb in the Valley of the Kings, likely begun for him upon his accession, was nowhere near complete. A grand kingly tomb took years, even decades, to prepare. There was no time. A decision was made, likely by his successor, to bury Tutankhamun in a different tomb, one that was already cut, but was much smaller and not originally intended for a pharaoh. The tomb we know as KV-62 was likely a private tomb intended for a high-ranking noble, perhaps even Ai himself. It was quickly adapted for the burial of a king. This explains its small size, its unusual layout with a right-hand turn, and its sparsely decorated burial chamber. While the grand tombs of pharaohs like Seti, I had their entire length decorated with complex funerary texts. Tutankhamun's tomb has painted walls only in the burial chamber itself. The scenes are simple but ritually essential. His funeral procession, his meeting with the sky goddess, and his embrace by Osiris, all rendered in a style that is a fascinating blend of the lingering naturalism of Amarna art and a return to traditional formality. Because the tomb was small, The vast array of funerary goods prepared for the king's burial had to be crammed into its 4 small chambers in a chaotic, almost haphazard manner. Gilded chariots were disassembled, funerary beds were stacked one on top of another, and chests and boxes were filled to the brim and packed into every available space. Once the burial was complete, the tomb was sealed. It was robbed at least twice in antiquity, shortly after the burial, but the robberies seem to have been minor. The thieves were likely caught, and Necropolis officials entered the tomb, tidied up as best they could, and resealed it. And then a final act of fate ensured its preservation. Some years later, during the construction of the much larger tomb of Ramesses VI higher up the slope of the valley, the thousands of tons of limestone chippings excavated by the workers were dumped down the hillside, completely burying the entrance to Tutankhamun's little tomb. It was lost from sight and from memory. Akhenaten, the great heretic, was systematically erased from history by later pharaohs. His city was dismantled, his monuments usurped, and his name chiseled from the king lists. He was to be forgotten. And in the process of forgetting the heretic, the world also forgot about his minor successor, the boy king who restored the old ways. Tutankhamun, the healer king, lay sleeping under the rubble, his modest tomb and its fabulous treasures waiting in the silent darkness of the valley for over 3,000 years. For nearly 500 years, the Valley of the Kings was the most sacred and closely guarded place in Egypt, a symbol of the immense power and stability of the new kingdom. The pharaohs who were buried there from Thutmose I to the mighty Ramesses II ruled over a vast and wealthy empire, and their tombs were filled with treasures of unimaginable value. The system of secrecy and security, with the hidden entrances, the elite Medjay police force, and the isolated village of Deir el-Medina, was designed to protect these burials for all eternity. For a time it worked, but no system is infallible, and the stability that had defined the new kingdom could not last forever. By the end of the 20th dynasty, around 1100 BCE, the Egyptian empire was in decline. A combination of factors: incessant wars with foreign powers like the Sea Peoples, internal political divisions, crop failures, and rampant inflation led to a catastrophic breakdown of the central government's authority. And as the state weakened, the security of the Valley of the Kings began to unravel, leading to an epidemic of tomb robbery and a final, desperate act of preservation by a group of pious priests. The first signs of trouble appeared during the reign of Ramesses IX. A series of remarkable papyri discovered in the 19th century, known as the tomb robbery papyri, provide a vivid first-hand account of the crisis. These are the official court transcripts of the trials of men who were accused of violating the royal necropolis. One of the most famous documents, the Abbot Papyrus, records an investigation into the robberies launched by Pacer, the mayor of the east bank of Thebes, against his rival, Pavra, the mayor of the west bank, whom he accused of being complicit in the crimes. The papyrus details the inspection of 10 royal tombs. Most, including the tomb of Amenhotep I, were found to be secure. However, the tomb of a 17th dynasty king, Sobkhan-Saf II, was found to have been brutally plundered. The confession of one of the thieves, a stonemason named Emen-Penufer, provides a shocking account of the crime. He describes how he and his gang tunneled through the rock into the burial chamber. we found the god lying at the back of his burial place, and we found the burial place of Queen Nubhaze, his queen, situated next to him. We opened their sarcophagi and their coffins in which they were. We found the noble mummy of this king equipped with a falcon. A large number of amulets and jewels of gold were upon his neck, and his headpiece of gold was upon him. The noble mummy of this king was completely covered with gold, and his coffins were adorned with gold and silver inside and out, and inlaid with all kinds of precious stones. We collected the gold on the noble mummy of this god, and we set fire to their coffins. We took their furniture, consisting of articles of gold, silver, and bronze, and divided them amongst ourselves. This confession reveals the brutal reality of tomb robbery. The thieves were not just stealing treasure. They were desecrating the sacred bodies of the kings, ripping the mummies apart to get at the jewelry and amulets, and often burning the coffins and mummified remains to destroy the evidence. To the ancient Egyptians, this was the ultimate sacrilege, as it destroyed the pharaohs' chances of an eternal afterlife. The trials recorded in the papyri show that the authorities did attempt to bring the robbers to justice. The accused were interrogated, often under torture, which involved beating the soles of their feet with a rod. Some were found guilty and punished by impalement, a gruesome public execution designed to deter others. But the problem was too widespread. The confessions reveal that the gangs of robbers were often large and well organized, and frequently included the very officials and priests who were supposed to be guarding the necropolis. The lure of gold was simply too strong in a period of economic desperation. The situation continued to deteriorate during the reigns of Ramesses X and Ramesses XI, the last king of the new kingdom. By this time, the authority of the pharaoh ruling from the distant north was barely recognized in the south. The real power in Thebes was wielded by the high priests of Ammon at Karnak. These men, such as Herihor and Piank, acted as virtual warlords, controlling the army and the vast wealth of the temple estates. They saw the chaos in the Valley of the Kings and recognized that the traditional system of secret individual burials had failed. The tombs, once plundered, could offer no further protection to the royal mummies. Faced with the ongoing desecration of the bodies of Egypt's greatest kings, these priests decided to take drastic action. They initiated a secret, audacious plan. They would enter the violated tombs, not to steal, but to save. Under the authority of the high priest Piank and later Herihor, teams of officials entered the Valley of the Kings and began a systematic project of restoration and consolidation. They went from tomb to tomb, gathering the desecrated bodies of the pharaohs. They did their best to repair the damage, rewrapping the mummies and placing them in whatever coffins could be salvaged. A series of dockets and inscriptions written on the mummy's bandages record this process. For example, on the mummy of Ramesses II, we find a docket stating that it was moved from his own tomb, KV7, to the tomb of his father, Seti I, for safety before being moved again. This process of moving the kings from tomb to tomb went on for several decades, a desperate game of cat and mouse with the ever-present threat of the robbers. The priests were trying to find a secure place to hide the bodies of the great rulers of the new kingdom, including Amenhotep I, Thutmose III, Seti I, and the mighty Ramesses II and Ramesses III. Eventually, the priests realized that no single tomb in the valley was truly safe. They needed to move the mummies out of the Valley of the Kings altogether, to secret hiding places where they would hopefully never be found. They chose two locations. The first was the tomb of the pharaoh Amenhotep, 2 KV 35. This tomb was large and deep, and its burial chamber was chosen as a hiding place for a cache of 13 royal mummies, including Thutmose IV, Amenhotep III, Marinta, and Seti II. The priests cleared a side chamber, placed the royal mummies inside, and then sealed and tried to conceal the doorway. The second hiding place was even more secret. They chose an old, unfinished tomb high in the cliffs of Deir el-Bahari, overlooking the Temple of Hatshepsut. This tomb, now known as DB320, was an inconspicuous shaft tomb, easily hidden. Here, in the 21st dynasty, under the authority of the high priest Pinajam II, they gathered the remaining royal mummies they had rescued, over 50 in total, including the most famous pharaohs of the New Kingdom. The final docket on the mummy of Ramesses II records the culmination of this long project. The mummy of the great conqueror, along with that of his father, Seti I, and many others, was placed in this remote cliff tomb. The priests sealed the entrance, carefully hiding it from view. Their desperate mission was complete. The great pharaohs of the empire were now huddled together in two secret caches, stripped of their golden treasures, but their physical bodies safe, at least for now. This act marked the definitive end of the Valley of the Kings as a royal necropolis. It was now an empty, plundered boneyard. The sacred trust had been broken, the magic of the place shattered. The valley fell silent, its purpose concluded. For nearly 3,000 years, the secrets of these two royal caches remained safe. The locations were forgotten until, in the late 19th century, a local family, the Abd el-Rassels, stumbled upon the Deir el-Bahari cache, leading to one of the most astonishing discoveries in the history of Egyptology, and the rediscovery of the bodies of the very kings whose stories we have been telling. By the beginning of the 20th century, the Valley of the Kings had been a site of intense exploration and excavation for over 100 years. Explorers like Giovanni Belzoni in the early 19th century had uncovered magnificent tombs like that of Seti I. The great Egyptologists of the late 19th century, working for the Egyptian Antiquities Service, had systematically cleared and documented many more. By the early 1900s, the dominant view among the archaeological community was that the valley was exhausted, that all its secrets had been revealed. The American millionaire and amateur archaeologist, Theodore M. Davis, had held the concession to excavate in the valley for over a decade. He had made a series of important discoveries, including the tombs of Thutmose IV, KV 43, Hatshepsut as queen in KV 20, and the small, plundered tomb of Yuya and Juyu, KV 46. The parents of Queen Tai. In 1907, his team found a small pit, KV 54, containing a few jars and scraps of linen bearing the name of Tutankhamun. This was evidence of his funeral meal, but not his tomb. Davis, believing this to be all that was left of the king, famously declared in his 1912 publication, The Tombs of Harmhabi and Tutankhamunu, "I fear that the Valley of the Tombs is now exhausted." One man, however, refused to believe him. His name was Howard Carter, Carter was a British archaeologist and Egyptologist who had come to Egypt as a young artist at the age of 17, tasked with copying tomb paintings. He was a meticulous, stubborn, and intensely focused man who had risen through the ranks of the antiquities service to become chief inspector of antiquities for Upper Egypt. He knew the Valley of the Kings more intimately than perhaps any other person alive. He had worked there for years, walking its paths, studying its geology, and poring over the evidence. Carter was convinced that Davis was wrong. He had compiled a list of the New Kingdom pharaohs and compared it to the list of known tombs in the valley. One name was conspicuously absent from the list of discovered tombs: Tutankhamun, while a few scattered artifacts bearing his name had been found. His actual tomb, his house of eternity, remained lost. Carter was certain it was still there, somewhere beneath the sands and rubble of the valley floor. Carter's belief was more than just a hunch. He had a theory. The known tombs in the valley were mostly clustered in the main central wadi. Carter noted that the tomb of Amenhotep III was in the West Valley, and the tomb of Akhenaten was at Amarna. He reasoned that Tutankhamun, as the king who restored the old religion, would have certainly been buried in the traditional necropolis back in the Valley of the Kings. He also noted the location of the few items found by Davis that were linked to Tutankhamun. They were all located in a specific triangular area in the center of the valley floor, an area that had been largely overlooked because it was covered by the remains of ancient workmen's huts and, more importantly, by the massive piles of debris excavated during the construction of the tomb of Ramesses VI just above. Carter hypothesized that if Tutankhamun's tomb existed, it must lie buried beneath this debris. A small early tomb could easily have been covered over and forgotten. To test his theory, Carter needed funding, and that required a patron. In 1907, he found one in the person of George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. Lord Carnarvon was a wealthy British aristocrat, an avid amateur Egyptologist, and a passionate collector. He had come to Egypt for the warm, dry climate to recuperate from a motoring accident, and he had become fascinated with its ancient history. He agreed to fund Carter's work, and in 1914, they secured the concession to excavate in the Valley of the Kings after Theodore Davis relinquished it. The partnership was a perfect match of Carter's expertise and determination with Carnarvon's wealth and enthusiasm. However, their plans were immediately put on hold by the outbreak of the First World War. For 4 long years, serious excavation was impossible. In the autumn of 1917, Carter was finally able to begin his systematic search. He laid out a grid over the triangular area he had identified, the area that everyone else had ignored. His plan was to clear this area meticulously, section by section, all the way down to the bedrock. It was a monumental undertaking. The area was covered by thousands of tons of rock chippings and ancient flood debris, some of it many meters deep. The work was slow, laborious, and often disheartening. For 5 long seasons, from 1917 to 1922, Carter and his team of Egyptian workmen toiled under the blistering Theban sun. Season after season, they found almost nothing. They cleared vast areas of the valley floor, moving immense quantities of rubble only to find the bedrock bare. The financial cost was enormous, and Lord Carnarvon's patience began to wear thin. By the summer of 1922, he had spent a fortune on Carter's excavation, with very little to show for it. He summoned Carter back to his home at Highclere Castle in England and informed him that he was giving up. The search was too expensive and the chances of success seemed too remote. This was the moment that tested all of Carter's conviction. He passionately restated his case, arguing that there was one final area, a small section of the triangle near the base of the tomb of Ramesses VI, that they had not yet cleared. He was so convinced that the tomb lay there that he offered to pay for one final season of excavation out of his own pocket. Struck by his friend's unwavering determination, Lord Carnarvon relented. He agreed to fund one more season. It was to be the last chance. In the autumn of 1922, Howard Carter returned to Egypt with a sense of grim finality. He knew this was his last opportunity to prove his theory. He directed his workmen to begin clearing the very last unexcavated section of his grid, an area where a row of ancient workers' huts had once stood. They dismantled the huts and began to dig down through the familiar layers of rubble. The work began on November 1st. For 3 days, nothing. Carter's hopes began to fade. But on the morning of the 4th of November, 1922, the work crew was unusually quiet. Carter, arriving at the site, found his foreman, Reis Ahmed, waiting for him with an air of excitement. He pointed to the ground. There, emerging from the rubble, was a single rock-cut step. As the workers cleared away more debris, a second step appeared, and then a third. They had found a sunken staircase leading down into the bedrock. It was exactly what Carter had been searching for. He knew with a certainty that thrilled him to his core that he was on the verge of a major discovery. He immediately ordered the staircase to be refilled with sand to protect it, and sent an urgent telegram to Lord Carnarvon in England. It read, "At last I've made wonderful discovery in valley. A magnificent tomb with seals intact. Recovered same for your arrival. Congratulations." The long, arduous search for the lost king was over. The wait for the final revelation had just begun. The 2 weeks that followed Howard Carter's telegram to Lord Carnarvon must have been an agony of anticipation. Carter had the staircase completely refilled and posted guards around the clock. He knew he had found a tomb, but what kind of tomb? Was it a royal tomb or merely a private burial? And most importantly, was it intact, or had it, like every other pharaonic tomb found in the valley, been plundered by ancient robbers? The presence of seals on the lower part of the doorway he had uncovered was a promising sign, but not a guarantee. He could only wait. Lord Carnarvon, accompanied by his daughter, Lady Evelyn Herbert, made the journey from England to Egypt as quickly as possible, arriving in Luxor on the 23rd of November, 1922. The atmosphere in the Valley of the Kings was electric with excitement. On the 24th of November, the staircase was fully cleared once more, revealing a flight of 16 steps descending into the bedrock. At the bottom was a plastered sealed doorway. Stamped into the plaster were the Necropolis seals of the royal jackal and 9 captives, the symbol of the authority that guarded the valley. More importantly, Carter also found seals bearing the name of Tutankhamun. His theory was proven correct. This was indeed the lost king's tomb. However, his heart sank when he examined the doorway more closely. He could see clear evidence that a section of the doorway had been breached and then resealed in antiquity. The tomb had been entered by robbers. The question now was how far they had gotten. Had they ransacked the entire tomb, or had they been caught before they could do too much damage? With Lord Carnarvon and Lady Evelyn at his side, Carter gave the order to break down the doorway. Behind it lay a long descending corridor, completely filled from floor to ceiling with limestone chippings. This was another good sign. It suggested that the original Necropolis officials had refilled the corridor after the robbery to prevent any further entry. The task of clearing this corridor took the entire next day. The workers had to remove tons of rubble, passing it back in baskets, one by one. As they worked their way down, they found artifacts mixed in with the fill fragments of pottery. Broken wooden boxes further evidence that robbers had been there. Finally, late in the afternoon of November 26th, they reached the end of the corridor and found themselves standing before a second sealed doorway dot. This was the moment of truth. Like the first door, this one also showed signs of having been breached and resealed. Carter's hands trembled as he prepared to make a small opening. He stood on the threshold of the unknown, the culmination of years of tireless searching. With Lord Carnarvon, Lady Evelyn, and his colleague Arthur Calendar watching anxiously, Carter took an iron rod and chiseled a small hole in the top left-hand corner of the doorway. He used a candle to test for foul gases coming from the sealed chamber, and the flame flickered but did not extinguish. He then widened the hole, took the candle, and peered inside. The air that escaped from the chamber was hot, smelling of dust, perfume, and resin, the scent of 3,000 years of sealed history. At first, his eyes, accustomed to the bright sunlight, could see nothing but darkness. But as they slowly adjusted to the gloom, shapes began to emerge from the mist, strange and wonderful forms. He saw the glint of gold everywhere. There were animal-headed statues, gilded couches, overturned chariots, and mysterious black shrines. For a moment he was struck dumb with amazement. Lord Carnarvon, standing behind him, unable to bear the suspense any longer, asked, "Can you see anything?" Carter, his voice filled with awe, could only manage 5 words. Yes, wonderful things. He had breached the antechamber of the tomb, and it was packed to the ceiling with an incredible treasure trove. Nothing had prepared them for this sight. It was a chaotic jumble of objects, clear evidence of the haste with which the tomb had been packed, and also of the untidy work of the ancient robbers. But it was also clear that the robbers had been interrupted. The sheer quantity of material left behind was staggering. Dominating the room were 3 massive gilded funerary couches, with heads carved in the shapes of a lion, a cow, and a hippopotamus-like creature. Disassembled chariots, gleaming with gold and inlaid with semi-precious stones, were piled against one wall. Exquisite alabaster vases, painted wooden chests containing clothing and jewelry, and beautifully carved stools were crammed into every available space. Standing guard on the right-hand side of the chamber were 2 life-sized, black-painted statues of the king facing each other like sentinels. Carter realized they were standing guard over yet another sealed doorway. This, he surmised, must be the entrance to the burial chamber. The antechamber was an archaeological paradise, but it was also a logistical nightmare. Before Carter could even think about opening the sealed burial chamber door, every single One of the hundreds of objects in the antechamber had to be meticulously photographed, documented, and conserved before it could be moved. This was a task of unprecedented scale and complexity. Carter was no treasure hunter. He was a scientist. He knew that the historical value of the find lay not just in the objects themselves, but in their context. He immediately suspended the excavation and set about assembling a team of international experts, photographers, draftsmen, chemists, and conservators. It would take 8 years of painstaking work to clear the tomb. Over the next few weeks, as the team was being assembled, they explored the rest of the antechamber. They found a small, unsealed side room, which they named the Annex. It was in even greater disarray than the antechamber, its contents oils, baskets of food, and furniture jumbled in a chaotic pile, likely the result of the ancient robbers searching hastily for valuable metals. The sealed doorway between the two sentinel statues remained the focus of their attention. On February 17, 1923, in front of an audience of officials and dignitaries, Carter began the formal opening of the burial chamber. As he removed the plaster and stones, a stunning sight was revealed. The chamber was almost completely filled by a massive golden shrine. It was a huge box-like structure covered in blue faience tiles and gleaming gold leaf, so large that it left only a few inches of clearance between its sides and the walls of the chamber dot, as the team would later discover. This was only the outermost, of 4 nested shrines, one inside the other, like a set of Russian dolls. Inside the final shrine, they would find the heavy stone sarcophagus, and inside that a series of 3 nested anthropoid coffins. The innermost coffin, the one that held the mummy of the king himself, was made of over 110 kilograms of solid gold. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb was a global sensation. It revitalized interest in ancient Egypt and created a wave of Egyptomania that swept across the world. But for Howard Carter, it was the beginning of the most challenging and important work of his life. He had looked upon wonderful things, and now he had the immense responsibility of preserving them for all time, a task that would consume the final years of his career and solidify his place, and that of the boy King Tutankhamun, in the annals of history forever. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 was not an end, but a beginning. It marked a profound turning point in the history of the Valley of the Kings and in the world's relationship with ancient Egypt. The breathless newspaper reports, the stunning photographs of the golden treasures, and the sheer romance of a lost pharaoh's tomb, found intact after 3 millennia, captured the global imagination. A wave of Egyptomania, not seen since the Napoleonic era, swept across Europe and America. Fashion, architecture, and design were suddenly awash with Egyptian motif. The discovery transformed archaeology from a dusty academic pursuit into a thrilling adventure in the public eye. But beyond the popular frenzy, the discovery and its aftermath left a deep and lasting legacy, reshaping the practice of archaeology, fostering a new sense of national identity in Egypt, and cementing the Valley of the Kings' status as one of the most important cultural sites on the planet. The first and most immediate legacy was the monumental task of clearing the tomb. Howard Carter's approach set a new standard for archaeological methodology, resisting the immense pressure to quickly reveal the tomb's secrets, he insisted on a slow, painstaking process of documentation and conservation. Every single one of the 5,398 objects found in the tomb was given a reference number, photographed in situ, drawn, and described on a detailed record card before being carefully packed and transported to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Carter's team of specialists, led by the chemist Alfred Lucas and the photographer Harry Burton, performed miracles of conservation on site, treating fragile textiles, preserving decaying wood, and consolidating delicate beadwork. This meticulous, multidisciplinary approach became the benchmark for all future archaeological excavations. Carter demonstrated that the goal of archaeology was not simply to find treasure, but to recover knowledge. The chaotic jumble of objects in Tutankhamun's tomb, when properly recorded, became an invaluable library of information about royal funerary practices, craftsmanship, and daily life in the 18th dynasty. The discovery also had a profound political and cultural impact within Egypt itself. The find came at a critical moment in the nation's history. In February 1922, just months before Carter found the tomb, Egypt had been granted nominal independence from Britain. A new spirit of nationalism was surging through the country. The treasures of Tutankhamun were not just ancient artifacts. They became powerful symbols of Egypt's glorious, independent past. The Egyptian government, flexing its newfound authority, asserted its ownership over the entire find, rejecting the old system where excavators were often granted a share of the discoveries. The decision that all the treasures would remain in Egypt to be housed in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo was a landmark moment. It established a precedent for the protection of national heritage and marked a definitive end to the colonial era. Practice of exporting antiquities. Tutankhamun became a national hero, his golden mask an icon of Egypt itself, a direct link to a time when the nation was a world power. However, the legacy of the valley is not without its challenges. The very fame that Tutankhamun's discovery brought has placed the necropolis under immense strain. Tourism, while economically vital, has become one of the greatest threats to the tomb's survival. For decades, thousands of visitors have poured into the narrow, fragile tombs each day. The moisture from their breath, the lint from their clothing, and the touch of their hands have caused irreversible damage to the delicate paintings on the walls. The vibrant colors that had survived for 3 millennia in a dry, stable environment began to fade and flake. The plaster started to blister, and bacteria and fungi began to grow on the painted surfaces. Recognizing this threat, the Egyptian authorities and international conservation bodies have undertaken a massive effort to save the Valley Dot in 1979. The Valley of the Kings, along with the entire Theban necropolis, was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognizing its outstanding universal value. This brought new resources and a global focus on conservation. A long-term plan was implemented to manage the impact of tourism. Many of the most fragile tombs, including that of Seti I and Nefertari in the Valley of the Queens, have been closed to the general public for long periods, accessible only to a limited number of visitors for a high fee. In other tombs, new ventilation systems have been installed, along with raised wooden walkways and glass panels to keep visitors from touching the walls. The lighting has been replaced with low-heat, low-impact systems. Perhaps the most significant conservation project has been the creation of high-quality, full-scale facsimiles of some of the most important tombs. A perfect replica of Tutankhamun's tomb, created using advanced 3D scanning and printing technology, has been opened near Howard Carter's house at the entrance to the valley. This allows visitors to experience the tomb exactly as it was found, without causing any further damage to the original. This facsimile-based preservation is a pioneering approach that may be the future for protecting fragile heritage sites around the world. The scientific exploration of the valley also continues. While the age of discovering new, intact royal tombs is likely over, modern technology is allowing archaeologists to learn things about the valley that Carter could never have imagined. Ground-penetrating radar and other remote sensing techniques are being used to scan the valley floor and the tomb walls, searching for hidden chambers or previously unknown structures. DNA analysis of the royal mummies found in the caches has begun to untangle the complex family relationships of the 18th dynasty, confirming, for example, that the mummy found in KV 55 is indeed the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, and that he was the father of Tutankhamun. The Valley of the Kings has transformed from a place for treasure hunters into a vast, open-air laboratory for scientists, historians, and conservators. Ultimately, the enduring legacy of the Valley of the Kings is its powerful testament to the human search for meaning in the face of mortality. The tombs are more than just archaeological sites. They are profound expressions of faith. They represent a belief system of incredible complexity and beauty, a conviction that death was not an end, but a transition to an eternal, glorious existence. The pharaohs who commissioned these tombs, and the thousands of artisans from Deir el-Medina who labored to create them, were driven by a shared and unshakable belief in the power of ritual, art, and secret knowledge to conquer oblivion. As we walk through the silent corridors of these tombs, we are not just looking at ancient art. We are tracing the steps of a journey through the underworld that the Egyptians believed led to rebirth and eternal life. The Valley of the Kings remains a sacred place, a landscape that bridges the worlds of the living and the dead, and a timeless symbol of humanity's deepest and most persistent hope, the hope for an eternity as brilliant and as enduring as the Egyptian sun. Our long night's journey together is drawing to a close. We have walked the sun-scorched paths of the Valley of the Kings, from its genesis in an act of secrecy and faith to its golden age of artistic splendor. We have met the skilled artisans of Deir el-Medina, the architects of eternity who lived and breathed this sacred project. We have deciphered the cryptic messages on the tomb walls, the divine roadmaps that guided the pharaoh through the treacherous 12 hours of the night. We have witnessed the ritual of the golden sleep, the intricate process of mummification that anchored the soul to its eternal vessel. We have felt the tremors of Akhenaten's heresy and understood how its failure led to the hurried burial of the boy king, Tutankhamun, sealing his treasures from the world. We have uncovered the sad decline of the valley, the desperate work of the priests to save the royal mummies from desecration, and the centuries of silence that followed. Finally, we stood alongside Howard Carter in 1922, sharing in his breathless anticipation and peering into the darkness to see wonderful things. The story of the Valley of the Kings is a story of the grandest scale, a 500-year-long national effort to cheat death. But it is also an intensely human story. It is the story of a vizier like Ineni, tasked with finding a secret place. No one seeing, no one hearing. It is the story of the workers striking for better wages, their voices echoing across 3 millennia. It is the story of Howard Carter's stubborn, unshakable belief that a lost king still lay beneath the sands. And of course, it is the story of the kings themselves, whose hopes and fears for the next world are painted in stunning detail on their chamber walls. The valley is a testament to the universal human desire to be remembered, to believe that our existence has a meaning that time cannot erase. It is a reminder that in the face of our own mortality, we too create our own valleys of kings, our own tombs of memory, filled with the stories, achievements, and loves we hope will endure. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the heart of ancient Egypt. I hope this story has brought a sense of wonder and tranquility to your night. May your own dreams be filled with journeys as profound and as beautiful as that of the sun god sailing towards the dawn. Until our next journey, together sleep well.